You are listening to WCJV Digital Broadcasting, Youngstown, New York.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report Aftershow, brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Sign up there, get yourself a free audio book, guys. It's a deal of a lifetime. You can't beat it. And we're here tonight with Robert Schneck, who's the author of all these great books, and has this Facebook page called Historian of the Strange, and the author of The President's Vampire, which is crazy enough. And then you got Mrs. Wakeman versus the Antichrist, which is really, really fascinating, man. This whole Mrs. Wakeman story goes way, way back to all this kind of crazy cults. Now, have you looked into any other kind of cults besides Mrs. Wakeman?
Well, again, when I was looking for examples of people that had been killed by cults, there were the Cobbites, who were they were down in White County, Arkansas. They were a very small group, but they used to show their faith by walking along rooftops. Where roofs come to a point, they would walk along them with their eyes closed and their arms extended, and that was how they would demonstrate faith. But finally, they also began to demonstrate against allowing the sale of liquor and things like that, which made them pretty unpopular in the area. And finally, their leader, Mr. Cobb, he declared that it was probably the end of the world. So they used to drag people who were passing by the house. They would drag them in and give them a good talking to about the church and the coming apocalypse. Anyway, a local bartender decided that he would go have some fun and make some fun of them. So he rode out to where they were staying, and he made a sarcastic remark, and that's when they chopped his head off and stuck it on the fence post. They were pretty much hunted down after that and driven out of White County, Arkansas. But there are still some remnants. Apparently, there was a Cobbite cemetery is somewhere in White County. So, there have been a bunch of peculiar cults. A lot of them were related to the idea, the Millerism, which was the idea that the world was going to come to an end around 1840 something. That was a very intensive and widespread belief that this farmer named Miller had figured out when exactly the world was going to end, and a lot of people really did believe it. In fact, if you go to Historian of the Strange, I've got a cartoon up on the top of the page that shows a bunch of Millerites standing on top of roofs waiting to ascend to heaven.
That's interesting. And in 2012, there were a lot of people who really were convinced that whole Mayan calendar thing like that,
Yeah, I mean, in my lifetime, there have been, there was Y2K. There was, last year was it Harold Camping had declared the world was coming to an end.
Yeah.
And then when that didn't work out, he declared the world was coming to an end again, and that didn't work out. So I can think of at least 4 or 5 examples of the world coming to an end just in my lifetime, and I'm 50.
Yeah, and there's all these people who get into this stuff, like Nibiru's coming, and there's going to be a meteor coming,
Yeah.
This whole doomsday mentality seems to be really,
yeah.
Do you think it's more prevalent now than it was?
No, you know what I really think the difference is? I think that we used to live in a world where people generally thought in religious terms, and religion gives a very good use for that belief. The Messiah is coming, the second coming of Jesus is coming. But so many people are secular now, and they don't necessarily believe those things, but they still have that urge to know that we're towards the ultimate point. We're near the end, that everything's coming to a climax now. And instead of it being religious, they give it a secular form.
Yeah, or even that the aliens are coming, they're going to come and rescue us from our own.
Aliens are going to come and rescue us.
Or a meteor or something. Something's going to happen.
Something big is going to happen.
Ebola, whatever it is.
Yeah,
ISIS, it's going to be something, right?
And, on rare occasions, things do happen. I mean, the 1918 influenza epidemic killed tens of millions of people, and yet we barely even remember it now.
Yeah. And even AIDS too. AIDS killed thousands.
But AIDS has done it quietly, and it also did a lot of it in Africa, which just doesn't get the coverage that anything that happens in the United States gets. But I really do think that there is that urge to be living in the most important times, and that also kind of goes back to what I said before about believing that your grandparents had a sex life. That these people historically are very much like we are now, even though they might have thought differently. But these same urges, these same beliefs appear year after year, generation after generation. They only take different forms, and they have different, rationales. So, for example, something paranormal happens now. Well, some people are going to say it's quantum physics. You know how many people in the world understand quantum physics? Probably 3 guys, and they barely understand it. But since it's weird, people are using it to explain the paranormal.
Right.
Before that, it was ESP. Everything is ESP. Now, I actually think there might be a little something to that, but it doesn't explain everything. And before that, it was electricity. And before that, it was spirits and demons, magnetism, all those different things.
Right, radiation. The guy, would walk by radiation, turn into Spider-Man.
Exactly. Those were the good old days.
I know, right? Everything was
when some radiation could turn bugs really big.
But wait a second. Do you remember the Spider-Man comic where Spider-Man would smoke a cigarette and turn into Spider-Man?
No.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. There was maybe it wasn't Spider-Man, but there was a superhero that would smoke a cigarette.
What kind of cigarette?
I don't know. Well, that's a good question because that's probably what was going on. But we're joined by Josh Brookshire, who always has great questions, man. Josh, he's the musician, part of a group called Bookhouse. And what's your website again?
It's www.bookhouse.bandcamp.com.
Bandcamp.com. And what about you got any gigs coming up? What do you got coming up?
Tomorrow we're going up to Washington, D.C. to play a record store show at the CD Cellar, 4 miles outside of the nation's capital.
Oh, very good. Hey, maybe you can jump over that fence, man. See how far you get.
Shoot. I said shoot, by the way. I'm a good Southern boy. I've never gotten the chance to I've driven past it on my way to Baltimore, but I'm actually going to enjoy the chance to get to see the Capitol up close for the first time in my life, man.
Yeah, you know what you got to do? You got to go into I don't know if they're still doing that tour into the Washington Monument, but go up in there, man. It's really pretty fascinating because they got all those tiles of all the Freemason lodges all over the walls. It's pretty fascinating. So we got with us tonight Robert Schneck. You got questions for him?
Yeah, I was wondering, sir, if you have any information about the Bennington Triangle at all.
Well, I'm not actually a big researcher in that, but a friend of mine, Joe Citro, he is the one to really talk to about the Bennington Triangle. That's the one in Vermont, right? In New Hampshire?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's the one where there have been a series of disappearances over, gosh, I think wasn't it something like 5 people disappeared in as many years?
Yeah, there's been multiple cases around there, people wandering in the woods, like you were saying earlier, just getting separated by eyesight, basically, and then vanishing into thin air and things like that. I believe a woman disappeared off the train up there, too, maybe.
Well, if I remember correctly, at least 1 or 2 of those people were murdered. And I seem to, now, don't quote me on this because I have not done the Bennington Triangle. It's just one of those things that, it's always floating around in the world of the strange and the paranormal. That's where the long trail is, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the Long Trail. I think there might have been a serial killer operating on the Long Trail. That is said without any expertise, without any real knowledge. Just the little bit I've read, I think there might have been a predator working on the Long Trail at one point. And I think that combined with just the normal disappearances that can occur in a wilderness area where someone wanders off, falls into a river, falls off a cliff, which anyone who's ever been in the woods knows how easy it is to get lost and to get hurt and to disappear. I think the combination of those things could have really gotten that legend going.
Yeah, especially here in Vegas, because we got these, our national park here, like Lake Mead and stuff like that, is like the number one place in the country for people, tourists to go hiking, and they get lost, they get injured and stuff like that. They fall into the lake, and they get drunk and they drown.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, forget it, man. It's because, and I see them, they get off the bus at Red Rock in their sandals, and they're just trotting off into the wilderness.
Right. I don't know what the deserts around Las Vegas are like, but I would be willing to guess that you can dehydrate in an hour in the summer.
Dude, forget it. There's trails right behind my house here, and I'm in town, okay? And right by where you can go back there in a couple hours and dehydrate and get in big trouble with boots on, with gloves, with the whole deal, and they get off these buses, these tour buses down to Lake Mead and stuff and they just let them loose in their high heels to go hiking out in the desert with the, hey, I'm not kidding you, man, with the snakes and the coyotes out there.
So, you put those things together and you realize that, there's a good chance that people can disappear.
But I also think too that I think you're right. The first conclusion would be, serial killers or a human, kind of thing going on. And then you start, widening your, suspicions, to what else might be going on.
Well, again, I think a lot of it can be explained through just simple misadventure. Yeah. People get lost. And as you pointed out at Lake Mead, there are a lot of people who don't have any respect for the outdoors. They don't realize that the whole world is not their backyard. Nature doesn't give a damn about them, and it will try to kill them as soon as it'll kill anything else. We lead very soft, protected lives and are rarely in a position where we could get killed.
You know what? You're so right, because, I'm from New York City. Mm-hmm. And when I first
kidding.
And you wouldn't believe it, but I used to have a really thick accent. But what happened is,
I'm from New Jersey. Can you imagine?
I'm from Staten Island, bro. What part of Jersey? But listen, when I first started coming out west, I used to go out to Tucson, Arizona, and I would get off the plane in a suit and tie, okay, in 110-degree weather, and go out there, just wander out into these desert areas like Vail, Arizona, man, and I just thought it was perfectly normal. And, God only knows what could have happened to me if I didn't have some good guys with me. But,
right, or if you ran out of gas.
Right, exactly.
It's amazing, the idea that you can drive through the desert and run out of gas and you're dead.
Yeah.
Simple as that. You're dead. I don't think many people really appreciate, first of all, how big this country is, and then how dangerous the wilderness is.
So true. If you grow up in a city, you're not prepared to go out there. If you're used to riding in the subway every day, you're not, you get out there and get a flat tire out in the middle of the desert. Yeah. Or drive into a flash flood, something like that.
Oh, that's another thing. My brother lives in Colorado, right, and every year they have flash floods and whole cars are carried away full of people.
Exactly, man. So Josh, what else? You're into all this stuff. What else you got?
If now, Josh, I don't know if you think there might be a paranormal aspect to it. I don't know the story that well. So if that's something, I can't really comment on that.
Oh, no, I pretty much have the same conclusion as you. I believe there's some sort of military installation that's been up there. That might be the only sort of, iffy type thing about it. But besides that, I've pretty much reached the same conclusion. Going into cults, and I think Ed might know where I'm going to lead with this because it's kind of my, little pet subject. I was wondering if you had any information on the Georgia cult of New Albion.
No one knows about this, man, but go ahead.
Did you ask me if I know about it? No, I don't know about it. I'm all ears.
Tell him, Josh.
Well, pretty much, it was like a splinter, like a UFO, splinter group of the 5 Percenters. And these guys, they set up basically this huge, what they called an Egyptian theme park.
Oh, I do know about that.
Go ahead.
I do know about that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's made out of plaster of Paris and things like that, right? They've got like a sphinx made out of plaster of Paris, and I have known about that. It's falling into disrepair, though, I think.
Well, they got raided, I believe, in the late '90s. It was like a mini Waco type thing. They ran up in there with helicopters and guys with M16s and breaking down doors. But basically, what happened is the leader of this like cult. He went by like 50 different assumed names. If you go on the Wiki, there's just lists and lists of all these ridiculous assumed names. But I think his like given name was like Dwight York, and he was accused of like interstate child sexual trafficking or something like that.
Yeah, I had heard about that. Yeah, I don't know why that seems to be something that happens with cults. I remember a few years ago.
Yeah.
I remember a few years back even the Hare Krishnas had a problem with that, where child molestation was going on. They eventually got rid of those people that were doing it, but it was going on. It seems to be, and of course, they were accused of that in Waco, and Jim Jones was accused of that. I don't know what the connection between that is. I'll bet other people have theories, though.
Yeah, any of these shows, man, we go into that in depth, Another thing I was wondering, do you know anything about the supposed zone of silence?
Again, that's one of those things I've heard about, but I don't know enough about it to really talk about it. I'm a bit of a pain when it comes to that because I do try to stick to things I've actually researched. Otherwise, I'm just talking through my hat,
Oh yeah, definitely. I appreciate that instead of somebody, trying to pretend like they know more than they do. It's refreshing, actually.
I barely know what I know, so.
Okay, let me think of another one. Weird locations. Here in North Carolina, there's a little tiny city a little bit north of Charlotte called Siler City, and they have this location that's called the Devil's Stomping Ground. Have you heard anything?
Yeah, I know that. I know that story very well. I have a collection of North Carolina folklore called the Devil's Stamping Ground. And if I remember the legend correctly, it involved somebody. Well, supposedly the stamping ground is caused by the devil walking around in circles. But didn't it involve somebody on a horse riding into a tree?
There are a few. The thing about the horse, I think, might be you might be misconstruing it with the Pactolus light.
It
you know
be.
that
Could be. But I am familiar with it, and it's one of those things that I would really like to see.
The Pactolus light, actually, when I went to college at East Carolina University, the Pactolus light was located north of the river in Pitt County. And, the thing is, if you do, any, research into, folklore and stuff like that, you'll all around these little college towns, you'll always hear something, you drive your car out, by, some abandoned train tracks and you flick your lights a few times and then a ghostly lantern will come out and slowly approach you, My thing was, and me and my friends, we went out there one night to see it, and we nothing happened, But our thing was, we thought it might have been like a fraternity hazing thing. Like they take the new pledges and make them strip down in their skivvies and make them just wait out there for someone to flash their light.
I have no trouble believing that. I think that there are a couple of well-known monsters that are really connected to fraternities and hazing. There's one up in New England. Oh gosh, Dr. something or another who was supposedly steals people's blood to keep himself alive, and it's almost certainly related to a fraternity hazing. There's also there's another university that's got a three-eyed man that lives in the sewers underneath the university, and they might send people down into the sewers as part of the pledge. I don't know, part of the hazing rather.
Yeah, because you got to like figure it, like you've got some like pimply faced 18-year-old who's in his underwear, and he's just as scared as the people in the car who go out there to expect a ghost. Because you can always have some drunk redneck like, "Hey man, let's go get ourselves a ghost," you know, like.
Well, also, but I think there might also be occasionally the possibility of ball lightning and electric plasmas following railroad tracks. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but I have noticed over the years that you do get a lot of reports of electrical anomalies around railroad tracks. So I can understand, for example, let's say there is an electrical storm going on. I can see something like that may be happening, but God knows I am no physicist. So, that's just something I've heard.
Well, we do out here I'm currently in Winston-Salem. It's the western part, but in the eastern part of the state where there's a little bit more like flat land, they do have like dry lightning storms during like the late summer and stuff like that. So it's very conceivable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it's one of those things that if I knew more about it, I could talk more about it. But I'm familiar, for example, more with the Brown Mountain lights, and I think there's one called the Hornet lights, and a few others, and they've gotten mixed up with UFOs and ghosts and a whole bunch of other things. A lot of folklore accumulates around lights.
Well, what's your take on the Brown Mountain lights? That's a little bit up the mountain from where I'm at.
Well, there is one thing that I have that I do understand, and that is that they did exist before the trains were put in, and that is the most common and popular explanation for them, that they are reflecting train lights. But from what I understand, and a friend of mine who lives in Canton, he spent a fair amount of time looking into the Brown Mountain lights, and he thinks there is something very odd going on there. It might be some kind of electrical activity, but it is very odd.
Okay, I have another quick question. In your studies of folklore, have you come across the phenomenon of like gravity hills at all before?
Yeah, gravity hills are very popular. Normally, the way a gravity hill works is that, for people that aren't familiar with it, you park your car at the bottom of a hill. You then take your hand off the steering wheel and you go up the hill. Now, from what I understand, and from people that I know who have tried gravity hills, it's supposedly an optical illusion. I've never been on a gravity hill myself. But from what I understand, that there's something about them that gives the impression that you're going up when you're actually going down. I don't see how that could work myself, but until I'm on a gravity hill, I don't know.
I haven't tried it. There's one that's supposedly in between my town and the town where my mom lives, a little bit up the road, and they say like you put your car in neutral and you put talcum powder on your bumper, and when you get to the top of the hill, you'll see little handprints like you pushed up the hill.
Oh, really? That's a very widespread story. Usually the way it works, the story is this, that a school bus got caught on train tracks and the train kept coming and it hit the school bus and killed all these little orphans that were on the school bus. They're usually orphans because it makes it more pathetic. Anyway, the story is that if you then park on the train tracks and put your car in neutral or turn it off and sprinkle talcum powder on the back of the car, on the bumper and on the rear, that the ghosts of the children will push your car off of the train tracks so it doesn't get hit. That is a very widespread story. I've heard it. There are versions of it in Texas, throughout the country. It's a good story. And supposedly there's a ghost photograph of these children. You can find it on any website that's dedicated to ghost photographs.
Hey, what about those stones here in Nevada and that flat?
The moving stones?
Yeah, what do you got on that?
Now, supposedly they have finally figured out how that works. And it is a question of humidity, weather, and just the peculiar way that the flatness of the area. You live in actually one of the most interesting parts of the United States as far as that goes. I mean, it is a wild area.
I know. I don't know what drew me here, but I was really attracted to this area for some reason. So what else you got in this area that I should go look for? What can you give me some?
What, in the Las Vegas area?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't really. I don't have a big history of it because Las Vegas's history is so short. For me, the big interest in Las Vegas history has been mob history, which I write about crime too, but not as much.
Okay.
In fact, my favorite kind of subject is one that involves crime and the paranormal and some other weird historical thing. And, when it comes to crime, you've got an amazing history in Las Vegas. Who ever heard of a city founded by a mobster? It's just, it's so strange.
The mayor, our mayor Goodman, was a mob lawyer, and now he, he couldn't run anymore, so now his wife is mayor. You can't beat this. It's very corrupt out here, man.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I had Frank Collada on my show, who was part of the Hole in the Wall gang. With the whole.
He was part of the group that broke through walls and stole things.
The Joe Pesci casino.
Yeah, Ant.
Tony Squatcho, yeah.
Right. Wow, that's wild.
So Frank Collada is the guy who was Frank Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in that movie. And I tell you, man, after I did that show with Frank Collada, okay, the next day I was hosting the sheriff's
Did they get you again? Is that back?
You have reached the voicemail box of 33642240002.
Oh, that's Josh.
At the tone, please record your voice message. When you are finished recording, you may hang up or press pound for more options.
Uh-oh. Is Ed still online? Shoot. But is he online? Is he still green? Okay, maybe we should hang up. Maybe he's trying to call us.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got you now, yeah. Okay, Josh, we got you too?
Yeah, sorry about that, man. I didn't know you were calling me back at first. I was like, who's this from California?
No, that's okay. Well, what happened was as soon as I mentioned Frank Collada, they came in here and I fought them off. I shot them out. We had a big shootout here, but we're back.
Yeah, you're just missing one thumb now, right?
Yeah, right. I got one thumb gone, but don't worry about it. So we're back on CJMarsRadio.com. We're with our guest Frank Schneck. We got our caller Josh Bookshire. And yeah, I was telling a story about how everyone knew Frank Collada everywhere I went, and if you look around, it's Frank Collada. Only did a few years in prison. Everyone else is dead. And here's this guy still wandering around talking about things. So it just makes you wonder about that whole story about what you see on TV with casino and stuff. But Robert, you were telling us a story about in New York City that there's something about.
It's just that it's generally considered a good idea not to get too interested in the mausoleums of dead mob leaders, because you are warned off to stay away from them. I don't know how true that is, but I have heard it again and again from people that do what they call grave rubbing, where you go to a cemetery and you'll put a piece of paper over a tombstone and you'll rub it with a kind of a thick crayon so you can take home a rubbing. Now, I've heard this story that they get warned off when they get too close to the gangster mausoleums.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Hey, what about Vanderbilt's tomb? You ever heard anything about that Vanderbilt's tomb in Staten Island?
Vanderbilt's? No, not Vanderbilt's. I did put something up on Historian of the Strange not too long ago about a tomb that was proposed to be built in Brooklyn, where Stanford White, the famous architect who was killed by Harry Thaw, he was asked to design a 300-foot tall hollow owl to act as a tomb for a famous newspaper man.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a shame it was never built. That would have been something to see. But it not only was it a hollow owl, but the eyes were going to be illuminated, and the man's body was going to be hung in his coffin, was going to be suspended from chains hanging in the middle of the air. But sadly, Stanford White was shot, and it was never built.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more or less what I've heard all my life.
What?
Yeah, because you know all the symbolism behind the owl, right?
Well, I do know that the Bohemian Grove group is supposed to use the owl.
Yeah.
But everything I know about Bohemian Grove, I learned from that book, Them, or whatever the name of that book, written by that British guy who sneaked in with what's his name? You know him, Alex Jones. He sneaked into Bohemian Grove with Alex Jones. And he wrote a book about it, a very funny book about their experiences going in there. Alex Jones didn't have quite the same sense of humor about it that he did, but it's a very funny book, and that's really all I know about Bohemian Grove. Apparently, they're big on peeing in public.
Right. Yeah, you hear that kind of crazy stuff. But then again, Nixon talked about it. He said they were all gay down there and stuff like that, and they were all running around in dresses and stuff.
Also to give Nixon also, there was a certain amount of class resentment, and a lot of these guys were very wealthy and they were very privileged, and Nixon always resented that. He resented people that went to Ivy League schools and things like that, and understandably, because they often looked down on him. So I think that might have had something to do with his dislike of Bohemian Grove. From what I understand, though, almost every major politician of that generation would visit, and they would go in these crazy parties and things, and that whole cremation of care ritual and that sort of thing. But really, again, I know very little about it, but from what I understand, it's more or less dying out the way it's the way so many of the fraternal groups are dying out, because why get together? You can look what we're doing. We're having a conversation, a several-way conversation. We're all in the United States. The idea that we all have to get together to look at a big stone owl is just comical. These are busy people.
I hear
you mentioned, grave rubbings and all that.
Yes.
Do you know anything about the Savannah area, like the Gracie myth?
About what?
Gracie, down in Savannah, the grave.
Which grave is
that?
Yeah,
she's. It's in the Bonaventure. It's the Bonaventure graveyard down in Savannah, they had to remove the bird girl, the girl that held the...
She's the girl that appeared on the book cover?
No,
she's not the statue from In the Garden of Good and Evil? Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil?
No, they had to move her out of there because people kept trying to steal her.
No, I can
She's
understand.
She's in a museum. But Gracie's another one that's pretty famous that apparently steals quarters. She's a little girl that broke her leg.
I didn't know.
There's the whole myth of if you leave a quarter for her, she'll take it.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I was down in Lexington, Virginia about 2 years ago, and that's where Robert E. Lee is buried. I was visiting his tomb.
Right.
And the grave of Traveler, his horse, is right outside the door, and it's covered with quarters and apples because students who go to school there leave a quarter or an apple to maintain Traveler and get good grades on their exams.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. In fact, I've got a photograph of it I have to post where it's just completely covered with quarters.
That's fascinating. Hey, what about the Georgia Guidestones? Have you looked into that?
You know, I know about them, and I know what's written on them. My big question is, who put them up? That's what I wonder about, because that's a big operation. That's expensive. You just can't do that overnight. So I really do wonder who's responsible for them. At the same time, doesn't it almost feel like a manufactured mystery?
Yeah.
You know, I've always had this kind of weird feeling like I'm being led somewhere with these things.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've always been a bit standoffish about the Georgia Guidestones. I feel like someone's trying to trap me into something. I don't know what, but I just assume not go into it.
Yeah, me too. I never fell for that one either. Now, what about Skinwalker Ranch?
Skinwalker Ranch. You know, when my first book came out, President's Vampire, they were selling it with Skinwalker Ranch, and I felt obliged to read it, but I never actually did. I felt bad about that. I did see a bad movie about it, though.
Right.
Very bad movie. So I would really rather not talk about that. There's still plenty of stuff, and I don't want to just beg off everything that comes
don't worry,
up.
don't worry, no.
But
what about Bob Bigelow? You're looking into Bob Bigelow, and
all I know about him is the relationship between the stuff that Art Bell said about him,
right?
And that is everything I know. I just, when I haven't done my own research, I step back. This has made kind of general conversation difficult. But trust me, if I'm with a bunch of my friends and we've had a few drinks, I'll talk about anything brilliantly.
Well, I would have a drink now.
What about, I got a question. Do you have any information on the supposed Coral Castle at all?
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I find the Coral Castle very interesting because, like anything related to what I do, it's great to have something really physical there. It's not just people talking. It's not just a memory. It's not just a scrap of paper. And I don't know how the man did it, but there have been people who have tried to say, they said to themselves, well, how would I do it? And very often they've come up with some interesting approaches using sand and water to try to move those things themselves, or try to move comparably sized pieces of stone. And I suspect that's what the man, was he Finnish, the guy who actually built the Coral Castle? I knew he was from an unusual country. Oh, yeah.
Not sure.
But I think that what he did was he used a combination of counterweight, sand, and water to move those things. I don't know how he did it, but I think it was brilliant the way he did it. And it's just, I can't wait to visit Coral Castle because it just looks so neat. It's just such an odd thing to see.
Going to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Miss Anna.
Go ahead, sorry. No,
you
okay.
first.
Right. all I was going to say was he was such a slight man to do such huge things. I mean, he had to have, he figured something out.
Yes, he did, and it really isn't the sort of thing where his own size matters. If he was using a combination of sand, weight, counterweights, things like that, it wouldn't have mattered how big he is. It's like looking at Egyptian monuments. I mean, they are simply stunning in their size, and they were all done by human power. I mean, there was nothing else used to move them. And when you look at how the Egyptians actually did move these things, it seems so simple when it's explained. But for example, they would build a sand path, and it turned out that if you water the sand, it's incredibly easy to move heavy things over it. So, I suspect he was doing something along those lines. I'd be very interested to go down there and see it for myself, because from what I understand, it is a remarkable building.
Yeah. Josh, still there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a bad habit of stepping on people's conversations sometimes. I said, hey guys, so sir, I was wondering if you have any information on either, I don't know how to phrase it, either optical illusion or magical painting, if you've done any research into the Victorian artist Austin Osman Spare, or the more modern artist Paul Laforet at all.
Well, I do know a little bit about them, Spare especially, but most of what I know about him involves his attempts at being a magician, being a master of sorcery, and his use of sigils where he would make a request and then stick it to his forehead and things like that. Little odd factoids about him is really mainly what I know. The idea of magical painting to bring something around through the use of art, it has a very ancient precedence. I mean, there are some people that believe cave painting was done for magical purposes. So, I'm not quite sure what you're asking me. I don't really have a lot to add. I know people who've done a lot more work about it than I have. See, again, Spare is not American, and I try to keep myself sane by just concentrating on one country. Otherwise, you just get overwhelmed.
Well, here's a little interesting tidbit. Going to New York, do you know the everyone knows Blondie, right? You remember Heart of Glass,
Sure.
Call Me.
Sure.
The guitarist of Blondie owns a very extensive collection of Austin Osman Spare originals.
Yes,
and
I heard about that.
He claims that there's one picture that every year on a certain date that he has to put it in a cupboard because the figure on the painting will move and look at him and start to emerge outside of the painting.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
There's an essay by the basically the inventor of industrial music and avowed occultist Genesis George of Throbbing Gristle and Psychic TV about how Chris Stein got him to basically babysit the painting one night, and he corroborated all this stuff and how he himself as an occultist was legitimately shocked by what happened. When we get off the phone, I'll send you a link on Facebook to the essay. It's very interesting reading.
I wish you would, especially because I am in New York. So if he's willing to let somebody else look at it, I'd be very interested in seeing it. Also, I would just love to see a real Spare painting, because I've only seen them in reproduction, and they are very beautiful.
They're very weird too. Have you seen his automatic writing drawings?
Yes,
where it's basically one line,
Mm-hmm. They really are fantastic. There are other interesting aspects of art with the paranormal, though, and this was something I have contemplated doing a book on, but it's very difficult to do art books because the reproductions are so expensive and the cost would probably be too high. But a number of people who claim, for example, to have been abducted by aliens have become artists, some of them quite good artists. There have been a number of psychics. Probably the best known would be, goodness, his name just slipped out of my mind. But they've also become painters.
Uri Geller?
No, not Uri Geller. He worked down at Duke University. He was one of the people that set up Operation Stargate.
It's on the tip of my tongue right now.
Yeah, he's got a very odd name. But it'll come to me. I actually met him once. I don't know why I can't remember his name, but he did these enormous paintings that supposedly it depicted the planets he would visit through astral projection. I almost had it. So there is a strong connection between paranormal experiences and art. Some people, for them, having a paranormal experience actually is transformative. They discover talents that they never knew they had. It's an interesting aspect of it that really hasn't gotten a lot of attention because it's not one of the sexier aspects of the paranormal.
It's a huge inspiration and subject for me. Like, I'm a musician. I dabble in painting and video editing and things like that. So whenever I see something that I feel is legitimately charged, I can almost see it. Like some of those spare drawings and also the artwork of Marjorie Cameron. I don't know if you've seen that at all. Like her artwork's just.
Is she the medium?
She was the wife of Jack Whiteside's Parsons of.
Yeah. Okay, I know who you're talking about. But I don't know the artwork. But I do know who you mean.
Oh, you have to look at her artwork. It's almost like a more 20th century version of some of the pen and ink drawings that Spare was doing. Very white background with intense lines, like pre-Ralph Steadman looking. I got a question, and this goes back to references to folklore. When I was in college, we had basically an urban legend, and it was verified by multiple people that this person did exist, of basically a transient hobo homeless type guy that had magical powers, and we called him Tricky Sam. He would do things like get arrested for drunk and disorderly and disappear out of the jail cell in the middle of the night. He would hypnotize spots with his
college was it?
What's that, sir?
What college was it?
Eastern North Carolina University, ECU Pirates. Purple and gold.
I'm just curious because I'd like to look into that. I find those kinds of stories very interesting.
Have you heard anything similar of that, as vagabond magicians or anything like that?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I heard one in Las Vegas, of all places. This was a less pleasant one, but I was on a radio show, and there was a man who called in about a very unpleasant experience he had in Las Vegas, where he had gotten out of the car and he was getting into the hotel, where he was approached by this homeless man, who he said was absolutely hideous, repulsive.
That was me.
Is that you? That was before your radio show.
Yeah, right.
Or that's why you do radio.
Yeah, more like after, yeah.
And this man sort of grabbed him, and he said that the feeling was just utterly loathsome. And he turned around, and the man vanished. I mean, he said it was not the sort of thing. He said it was not. It wasn't the sort of thing where he got lost in the crowd. He didn't jump under. He didn't hide anything. He vanished. And he had the feeling that every awful thing in Las Vegas had just touched him. Isn't that odd? What a strange thing to say. He said it was like meeting the embodiment of every awful thing in the city, in the flesh. And of course, there are other legends about transients who have magical powers. The Mormons they believe in the Nephites who travel around and will help out Mormons when they're in trouble. There is the very, very ancient traditions of gods, Jupiter and Wotan and Thor traveling around as vagabonds and meeting people and seeing how they're treated as strangers and rewarding those who are kind to them and punishing those who aren't. So it is one of the most ancient traditions you can mention, and if you start to look into mythology, you'll find countless numbers of examples.
Interesting. The guy that I'm talking about, he would do things similar to like an extreme version of David Blaine. He would basically accost young college girls on the streets and be like, I bet I can guess what color panties you were wearing, and they'd be like, leave me alone. And then he'd pull their panties out of his pocket and they'd reach down and be wearing no underwear. Or someone would see us across the street and he'd stare them in the eye. They'd get an intense headache and he'd walk up and hand them their Rolex watch out of his pocket. Things like that.
I never heard of anything quite like that. That is interesting, though. There's a big book waiting to be written on nothing but college lore because it's extensive. Every college has its lore, and it would be an enormous research undertaking, but it would be quite a book. Especially after something like, say, that happened at Virginia Tech, you can be sure that there was a body of folklore that has developed around the massacre at Virginia Tech, and so many similar things like that.
To clarify, though, this isn't really a college thing. It's more Greenville is it's still messed up like the South. It's divided on an east and west, good side, bad side thing, and it's more prominent among like the older African American community, which are a lot of my friends, so it isn't really tied into fraternity or hazing anything. It's more like a rural superstition type thing.
Oh, that's something that I am particularly interested in, which is American Black folklore, because so little of it has really been looked at. There is not a free and easy exchange of information among Black scholars and white scholars. There are whole areas of folklore that are really not discussed. In fact, that's the whole basis for the chapter in Mrs. Wakeman, which is on the clown panics of the 1980s, which I believe come out of Black folklore that have never really been looked at in the mainstream society. I don't know if you want me to get into that, but it's a whole. Okay,
you brought that in the show with Ed, but you never got around to it. I was wondering what's your take on these viral stories about supposed creepy clowns. They have that city in France that basically banned clown costuming for Halloween,
right.
And the Northampton clowns, the New York City clowns, etc. What's your take, sir?
I think that the first major clown panic took place around 1981, if I remember correctly, and it started in Boston. Lauren Coleman, the Fortean writer, Bigfoot expert, a bunch of other things, but he's the one who really found these stories, and he discovered that there were a series of clown panics beginning in Boston and moving west until it finally ended up in I think Kansas City, as well as showing up in Pittsburgh and a few other cities along the way. And the stories were usually pretty similar. A clown or group of clowns would approach a bunch of children and frighten them. Sometimes they would threaten them with guns or knives, try to get the children into the van. The whole thing had kind of a pedophilia quality to it. The idea that these clowns were trying to abduct the children for some unspeakable purpose. And these panics broke out in several cities where parents were starting to keep their children at home. No adult ever saw one of these clowns, but many children claimed to have seen them, as well as other costumed figures. There were people dressed as superheroes, someone in a gorilla costume, someone in a bunny costume. These went on for this panic went on for a while, but then petered out, and then local panics began to happen. Now, a lot of people blame John Wayne Gacy for this, and I think he might have contributed to it because he was infamous for being his hobby was dressing up as a clown and performing at charity functions. And other people blame Stephen King for it and forgetting that his book, It, which has Pennywise, the dancing clown, didn't come out until years after the big clown panic. But I have a theory that it goes back into black folklore. I think the origin of it is in black folklore, and that the origin of it goes all the way back to at least to the Klan, and probably earlier. We're not going to drag up the whole argument, but think about it. What are clowns? They are white-faced, scary-looking men in bizarre costumes who mean violence, which is a pretty fair description of the Klan. So, and you've also got that similarity of clan to clown in the names. Now, I'm not making the argument that is simply where the clowns came from, but I think that what happened was that a combination of black folklore about the Klan and about something called night doctors. Now, night doctors was this belief that was throughout the South, that medical students and doctors would come out at night, kidnap black people, use them for experiments, use their bodies for dissection, and would take their blood and turn it into medicine. Because there's an element in black folklore that white people need black blood to survive. In fact, that idea is still prevalent in Africa. Anyway, so there was this idea of the night doctors that was floating around for a long time, and I think that things began to come to a head in the Atlanta child killings. Because, most people remember the Atlanta child killings as Wayne Williams was molesting and murdering these children, and that's it. But in black folklore surrounding the Atlanta killings, there was a very strongly held and widely held belief that the killings were being done by Klansmen who were traveling around in vans, abducting black children and killing them. But beyond that, there was the idea that why were they doing this? Well, they were abducting the children and taking them to laboratories where their blood was being drained and used to make interferon, which was the cancer drug that was very popular at the time. So you've got this aspect of these doctors, these Klansmen, and the distinction is not very clear between them, abducting black children and using their blood to make medication. And I think that in around 1980 is where you see the change, because in 1980, the very first, as far as I know, the very first clown outbreak took place in Newark, New Jersey, about a year after those 5 boys I mentioned hours ago disappeared. It was about 2 years disappeared. And in this panic, clowns were driving around in vans, and they were throwing needles at children, and they were threatening to abduct them. Now, those needles go back to the old idea of the night doctors, because the night doctors would use hypodermics to make black people anesthetized. They would use them to knock black people into a sort of a coma, so they could kidnap them and carry them away and do these horrible things to them. And I think that ultimately is where the whole idea of the clowns came from. It came from this combination of ideas about the night doctors and the Klan, and they just sort of came together to create this belief in these evil clowns that were traveling around and trying to abduct children. The fact that this has resonated so much with people, I mean, the idea that this became a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, we talk about what's happening in France and all that. Well, South America had terrible clown panics. In Central America, clowns were supposedly abducting children to use them for the sex industry and for organ stealing. and for slaves to be adopted to the North. Throughout South America and Central America, this was a big thing for years. The fact that people are now dressing up as clowns in order to scare people is something that folklorists call ostension, where a folkloric idea is made real, is brought into the real world. And that's what they call it. Why people are responding to clowns so much so that Halloween has become almost nothing but clowns. I can't explain that. But that's my theory on where the whole idea of the evil clown came from, at least regarding those panics. That might not be that clearly explained, but I lay it out better in the book.
Very interesting.
That's fascinating, man.
Sorry, Ed.
That's great stuff, man.
Yeah, it's I can't prove it, but I really do think that that's where it came from. I don't know how it jumped from black folklore into white folklore, but it did. And I really think that's the origin of it. I think it's a combination of the night doctors, what happened in the Atlanta child killings, and the fear of the Klan.
Very interesting. Sir, have you done any research into the emerging, what Vice News has claimed to be the fastest emerging religion, the cult of Santa Muerte in Mexico? Have you done any looking into that at all?
Well, again, I concentrate on the United States, but since there are so many people of Mexican origin in the United States, I have looked a little bit at Santa Muerte. I find it very interesting. It actually goes to it has a Catholic context, but it really goes back to this older idea that there is a patron of everything, and that includes criminals, lunatics, psychopaths, and murderers, which I believe is who Santa Muerte is the patron of. It's an old idea, one that doesn't really seem to be in tune with modern ways of thinking, but traditionally, every trade, whether it's good or bad, does have its patron, and that Santa Muerte is the one who even the worst of the worst can call upon. I really can't add a lot more to that except to say that I know a few little things about it, like the different colors of the Santa Muerte for different aspects of it, and I do want to get a Santa Muerte because they're just so neat. I want to get one of the figurines because they're just so interesting looking.
That and also the Jesus Malverde as well, the patron saint of narcotics smugglers. That's a really interesting, 40 story to look into. Getting back up to North America, and not to be egotistical, but back to my home state, do you have any theories on the lost colony up there in Roanoke? What might have happened at all, sir?
Well, I don't really have any special theories. I mean, nothing that anyone else has, except that from what I understand, the colony was very poorly prepared, and I seem to have this vague recollection of something about their food supply being poisoned. Now, I could be mixing that up with something, but I do seem to remember that there was something that there was something maybe even done deliberately to ruin the colony, but I don't know very much about it. So don't go by me.
Mothman prophecy.
What about him?
Have you looked into it?
It's astonishing to me that so many people now know about that. That was. That's one of the amazing things about the age of the internet and cable television, because there was a time when nobody except a very, very small group of people had ever even heard of Mothman. I remember one time I was on the phone with the lady who was who was the head of the Chamber of Commerce at the time, and she didn't put any weight to it. She said it was a good old boy prank. I don't agree with that.
Didn't a bridge collapse, though?
Yeah, well, the Silver Bridge did collapse, but that that was probably just incidental. You can look at it in a couple of different ways. If you go to Historian of the Strange Facebook, I have a clipping there, which I put up just because it's one of the very earliest clippings of the Mothman story, and it shows some of the principals who were involved, and it rarely gets seen. When you read the early stories, though, you'll often hear them talk about it's a bird, it's a big bird. It's referred to that way many times. It was only later that when some journalist compared him to Batman that they came up with the Mothman explanation. But really, when you read the early versions, they talk about him as being a bird. So, take that for what it's worth. It does explain, though, why some people explained Mothman as being a sandhill crane.
Okay, really? Okay.
What that said, there are always other explanations. Someone was talking recently about some kind of Air Force or Army maneuver that was going on at the time where people were coming down in gliders, and that was the explanation. And then you'll get a full-blown paranormal explanation where they will talk about how this is one of those window areas where strange things come through other dimensions. For me, it's like a candy store. There's just so much. Which do you want to use? Do you want to look at the poltergeist? Do you want to look at the bridge collapsing? Do you want to look at the old idea that monsters, and the word monster comes from the Latin monstrum, meaning omen, that the appearance of monsters are a bad omen, that so maybe Mothman had to do with predicting the Silver Bridge collapse. And again, to go back to Lauren Coleman, Lauren has been keeping track for years of everyone connected to the Mothman movie who died, and he talks about a Mothman curse. So there's a lot. It's a very rich subject.
So you said earlier that you were from New Jersey. I was wondering if you had any special take on the so-called Jackson Whites or the Rompano Mountain Indians at all, sir.
Yeah, I do find them interesting. From what I understand, and this is from other researchers, that they are a combination of
laws and all that.
I'm sorry?
Runaway slaves, outlaws.
Right. That's from what I understand, and that's what they are. And apparently, genetics backs that up, but I don't know enough about it to talk. But the Jackson Whites, when I was a little kid, we heard all kinds of weird folklore about the Jackson Whites. They were, for some reason, this was the one I always heard, that they would steal your car and hang it in a tree. I don't know where that came from. But they were like these mysterious people that with that evocative name, and stories accumulated around them. But from what I understand, mainly they are a combination of local Indian, escaped slave, some white people that were living in the area, and the Jackson Whites are the result. As far as I know, that's what it was. But beyond that, I think I don't know anything special, except that I am, from that area, so I did hear those weird stories.
So, what's your take on the Jersey Devil then, sir?
The Jersey Devil, I think it's an excellent example of old-fashioned European folklore that was brought over to this country. I mean, when you look at the old story about Mrs. Leeds, that is the kind of story that you'd find all over Europe. I mean, the woman was a witch, and she had a monstrous child that would have been related to you'll find that in witch trials many, many times. In fact, they never really talk about they never mention Mr. Leeds. So I've always assumed that the Jersey Devil's father would have been the devil, and if Mrs. Leeds was a witch, then she had a relationship with the devil, which is one of the traditional things that witches do. They have sex with the devil, and they give birth to monstrous children. So that was the Jersey Devil tradition does fit into the old witch lore. You'll find that in any collection of witch hunter material, whether it's Kramer and Sprenger, the Malleus Maleficarum, or James I's Discovery of Witches. They all talk about that. So that's pretty much traditional. I think that the Jersey Devil took on local forms. I mean, and it actually moved into something where it became sort of a cryptid. That is to say that now people are wondering, well, is there some creature out there that we've named the Jersey Devil, possibly something like a Mothman, which could be a big bird, or the problem, of course, is that the Jersey Devil takes so many different forms. There are forms where it's sort of like a Bigfoot. The traditional form is more like a dragon. So it does cover a lot of ground. It's pretty much if you see a monster in New Jersey, it's the Jersey Devil.
Yeah, including like 3 Stanley Cup winning teams, right?
Yeah, we got that too. See, that's actually one of the wonderful.
Sorry.
That's one of the wonderful things about monsters is that they become a part of our identity. You know, a monster can help a little place take on a whole new. It can take on a new identity. It can take on a whole new dimension. You know, take some place like Churubusco. Churubusco, I think, is in Indiana. I don't remember I don't remember offhand. But Churubusco there's no reason to know Churubusco except that they used to have giant turtle sightings there. And they named the giant turtle Oscar, and Oscar became the Beast of Busco. And if you, again, I hate to keep saying Historian of the Strange page, but if you go down there and you scroll down towards some of the older entries, you'll see some pictures that were taken of the annual turtle parade and the annual they had turtle days, where in the parade they made this big float of Oscar the giant turtle. So it is one of those, monsters are one of those things that give a place its identity. Trust me, you never would have heard of Point Pleasant if it wasn't for Mothman.
Absolutely.
And now, here's the Chupacabra.
Oh.
The Chupacabra?
Yeah.
Well, Chupacabra is, first of all, again, this is Lauren Coleman. It is Chupacabras. It is plural. I don't know why, but that is correct. It's Chupacabras. And that is also one of those things that, like the Jersey Devil, has taken a number of, really a surprising number of different forms. The original one was a sort of a vaguely dinosaurish-looking gray with points coming out of its back. There is a Mexican kind of Chupacabras, which is more like a giant winged rat. And then there is the most recent incarnation of it, which is some kind of a mangy dog or a mangy coyote or a hairless dog, because it bled over into something called the Texas Blue Dogs, which is a really interesting phenomenon and one that I wish I knew more about. But a friend of mine in England has done a lot of research on them, which seems to be this strain of hairless wild dog that has been seen in Texas several times. And it's not like we're just talking about people's stories. They've got a stuffed one. This thing really does exist, whatever it is. And his theory is that it's a recently emerged species. Or at least I shouldn't say for him. I mean, I believe that's what his theory is, that it's a recently emerged species, and possibly the result of crossbreeding between domestic and wild canids.
Yeah, because it's funny, because I used to go down to Puerto Rico all the time, because I had family down there, and I had a girlfriend down there, and whenever you talk to the locals about the Chupacabra, the smile comes over their face.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a story, but
oh yeah,
but pretty much it's kind of, everyone knows it's kind of a joke. Hey, what about giants? There's all these stories about giants buried in the giant bones and stuff found.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because if you go through 19th century newspapers, you will find endless stories about people digging into old Indian mounds and finding giant skeletons, sometimes with extra rows of teeth or horns, or red hair. There are always the odd stories, and I always dismissed them. I always said, "Oh, that's just typical 19th century nonsense." The kind of story that is easy to forget. However, in the last few years, they have found some very, very large skeletons of probably Indians with what looks like acromegaly. So that these, acromegaly is a disease that causes the bones to become much larger, much boxier, much squarer rather, and even to grow extra teeth, if I remember correctly. And I could be wrong on that, but if I remember correctly. So all these stories that I always dismissed might have had some basis. I'm sure they were exaggerated, but there might be some truth behind them. And of course, there are people that look at them from a religious perspective.
Right.
They talk about the Nephites not the Nephites, I'm sorry, the
Nephilim.
The Nephilim, rather, yeah. They talk about the Nephilim and that sort of thing. And of course, there are also out-and-out hoaxes like the Cardiff Giant and the Solid Muldoon, which was made by the same guys who made the Cardiff Giant. But those hoaxes do not change the fact that there really does seem to be something to it. I suspect that over the next few years, as more research is done, we might be finding some very interesting things. I'm looking forward to that.
Have you ever, sir? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
Do you have any lore or legends connected with the Mennonite or Anabaptist community? I was wondering specifically if you had heard anything about the so-called corn wolf at all, sir.
Well, I didn't know that the Mennonites had a belief in the corn wolf, but the corn wolf has got a long tradition in Europe. And if I remember correctly, now you probably know more about this than I do, but if I remember correctly, the corn wolf is associated with harvest time. And
yes, sir.
Yeah, and it's in the folklore version of it, it's related to, I'm guessing here. I'm reaching back. Do you tell me what you know, and let me take off from that.
Okay. There's a very, very good. It's a historical it's not fantasy, but it's a fiction book with a lot of historical accuracy added into it. It's called Corn Wolf by an author who unfortunately committed suicide. His name was Tristan Egolf from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And in his book, he conveys the real and documented case of Peter Stubbe, Stubbe, who was either a very, very early version of a serial killer and during the war. Forgive my mental block right there. But in Europe, who apparently committed incest with his family and murdered people in the form of a wolf after inheriting a supposed wolf girdle from the devil himself, which allowed him to transform into a humanoid wolf form. This guy was tried and convicted, drawn and quartered, tortured, murdered, and there's a bunch of woodblocks about it, but it's a very documented case. The corn wolf blight, I had always heard, was supposedly a familial curse that was visited on families that had fallen into apostasy in the Mennonite faith, who had abandoned their old morals, and there would be livestock attacks, crops uprooted and torn down, random murders and things like that. I was just wondering if you had anything based on that at all.
That is very interesting. I never heard of that. However, I do know of a few things that might be related to it. There is a tradition that the spirit of the harvest takes the form of a wolf or a cat. And probably that goes back to the fact that when the harvest is ripe, the fields fill up with mice and to eat the harvest, and then these carnivorous animals, mice and wolves and cats, follow the mice into the fields, which was something that the farmers, of course, had to be wary of. And I know, for example, that there are several traditions that connect wolves to the harvest. So, for example, if a wolf comes into a field and waves its tail a certain way, that means it's going to be a good harvest or a bad harvest, and you have to chase it out. But there are a bunch of traditions related to that. But I do know that there are some werewolf traditions among the Pennsylvania Dutch, which is not surprising because they came from Germany, and that would apply to the Mennonites too. They also came from Germany. And there is a rich tradition of werewolf lore from Germany. You mentioned Peter Stumpf. He was one of them. The French also have that, which is why you'll also find werewolf lore among people of French descent in the United States. The Arcadians, they have the Rougarou down in Louisiana among the Cajuns. And up in Canada and in the North Woods, you'll also find some werewolf lore. So again, I would not be surprised about some kind of werewolf lore related to in the Mennonite tradition. It would just make perfect sense to me.
Another thing that they tied it back to was during the time of the 100 Years' War, when you had the conflict between the Lutherans and all the Protestant Catholic things. There was so much famine that people would go into the fields and literally steal corn. They were like the bandits, so they called them corn wolves.
Oh, that also makes sense. But I do know about those traditions though. So it would make sense that they would refer to them as wolves because there is in German lore, if I remember correctly, in German lore, the bandit and the wolf are often put together. They can be used. The words can be used alternatively. So that does make sense.
Speaking on that earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. Continue, sir. I just had something that ties into it afterwards. Continue. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm done.
Oh, well, I was wondering, did you have anything on Joan of Arc's, the guy, what was his name, Giles de Rape, the guy that was...
Well, yeah, I mean, I do know the story. It's a gruesome one and a complicated one. Was there an aspect of it you wanted to talk about?
Basically, his connection to the legend of Bluebeard. Do you know if that's an accurate representation of what he was... Because I hate to go back to Wikipedia, but there's like the whole Dillion, he spent all of his money and had to kill people basically to get it back and all these things. And then you have the people that claim that he was a legitimate occultist who was damaged by watching Joan of Arc being burned.
I understand I do know about the connection that people have made between him and the Bluebeard legend, but from what I understand, the Bluebeard legend is much older and goes back to probably to the Middle East or into Asia. So it wouldn't surprise me if the two stories came together. But I don't think that he's the origin of the Bluebeard story. I think he became an aspect of it. I think that would probably be the safest thing to say.
I can understand that. Do you have any opinion on the supposed cult of the Aga Khan at all? Do you have any opinion on that?
I don't know much about that, but he's the one who gets weighed against gold bars or diamonds or something.
Supposedly the Aga Khan was the continuation of like Hassani Sabat.
Yeah, I do know about that, but probably no more than you do.
Well, what do you know about this Edison's secret spirit experiment? Like toward the end, he was trying to talk to the dead, right?
Well, Edison was he was a very practical man, and from what I understand, towards the end, he did come up with he designed at least something to make it possible to hear spirit voices. But I believe that Edison was working on the idea that spirit voices were very low and that they were sub-audible. And so he had come up with something to make it possible to hear those voices. So it was it might have been nothing more than a big amplifier. Okay. As a kid, also he he was generally, though, he was not all caught up in spiritualism. It was just one more little thing that he was interested in. You know, at the Edison Labs, they had this rule that you had to come up with a new invention every 3 days, and you had to have a breakthrough every 10 days or something. So they were always turning out inventions. It was a factory for inventions.
Okay.
And the fact that they would have done something about spiritualism doesn't surprise me, especially if he thought he could market it. Because he was a very practical man.
What about the Amityville Horror? Look into that?
The little bit I know, that has got to be one of the most controversial subjects. I mean, when you start, let's start off with, yes, there was a horror. There was a terrible murder in that house. An entire family was massacred, possibly by the son. Probably by the son. He was certainly convicted of the crime. I think he did it. I think the stories that he came up with about demons and all that was an attempt to try to lighten up the charges or get him declared insane or whatever it was, but it didn't work. I have heard so many stories. You know, I know kind of inside people, and they tell me such different things. People I trust will tell me very different things, that it was legitimate, that it was a case where Ed and Lorraine Warren were connected to it, and the son who was there claims that the whole story as presented in the book was more or less accurate. And then you have other people saying that none of it happened. You've got neighbors saying that none of it happened, nothing, and that the whole thing was cooked up between the Lutzes and their lawyer, and that I have no idea, none. I don't know what happened. I do know that everyone who's lived there since has said the only thing that haunts it are people showing up who want to come inside, and then that's been it. But then then you get the son. Lutz, the son of the Lutzes, who claims that it all happened. I am so confused by every different version of it that I step back and say, again, this is one of those things where if I want to talk about it, I'm going to do some research first.
Did you ever look into the whole story about how the paranormal investigators all started stalking and harassing each other and suing each other? And that's my favorite part of that story. Are you familiar with that?
I really don't, but it doesn't surprise me because, it's the worst part about this is, and this is why I've always avoided UFOs, because these guys are always suing each other. And I just don't want to get into that. I stick with my history, and I am friendly with a lot of these people, and I leave it at that. It's the money that comes with it, because how many movies have been based on the Amityville Horror now? 6, something like that. Including the remakes. Plus, Jay Anson made a fortune with that book, so there's money floating around. There are people claiming they've been defamed. There are people claiming that it never stops. There should be a special word for this when something paranormal happens and this kind of pileup occurs. This just crazy whirlpool starts to form around it.
Well, this went on for like 15 years.
Oh, I know. It never stops.
With lawsuits and vandalism. I think they even tried to run one guy over. One of these Ghostbusters tried to run another Ghostbuster over with his car. And that's my favorite part of that story. But, also, too, the psychiatrist who tried to get the insanity defense for that kid, DeFeo, I think it is.
Yeah, Ronnie.
Right. He was the same guy who tried to get the insanity defense for Berkowitz.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
It's both New York.
Yeah,
so
right.
That wouldn't surprise me. But
But what about this? We were talking about Arliss Perry. Did you know that Arliss Perry's husband was the psychiatrist who treated the children at Waco?
I did not know that.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Small world, isn't it?
Yeah, you might say that. Yeah.
but again, with the Amityville Horror, there's a crude term for it, and I'm not going to say it, but there's a crude term for what that is, some kind of a storm that is, and I am not going to get into that storm.
Right. I said, but I love that part about how they're running each other over in college. You gotta love that.
I mean, the fact is, I know of cases of parapsychologists who've pulled a knife on each other.
Yeah, right.
It's very intense. It's very intense, and people's egos get involved. And this isn't even. We're not talking about money here. We're talking about ego, and we're talking about people claiming things for themselves that they discovered such and such, and not others, and they want the credit for it. So it's I think that's part of the reason why years ago I gave up on doing anything that involves living people. I stick to history.
Very
good.
If
If they're not dead, I don't want anything to do with them.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, because I get involved in a lot of crap, and I get a lot of grief from it.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the very first thing I ever tried researching was the murder of a parapsychologist, and I was able to find the phone number of a friend of his, and I called and asked to speak to him. Well, he had died about 3 days earlier, and his widow picked up. And she got hysterical. And I was never in a situation like that in my life. This was the very first time I had ever tried to do research. And I told myself after that, no, I'm sticking to history. I love history, and I'm going to stick to it because no one cries.
Yeah. But you can't get a confession either.
No, you can't get a confession, but I know I never will anyway. So it's just I stick to things that I stick to history. I love history, and it doesn't have that emotional quality to it, and also I don't get sued.
Right.
I've got
you don't have to keep a lawyer on retainer.
Go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, Ed, man.
Go.
Sir, I was wondering. I have a question about an archetype in American folklore. I don't know if you've read the book Ishi at all. It's about the last of the Yankee Indians, who came out of the hills and who wanted the people of Northern California to kill him and all these things. What do you know any historical or folklore archetypes about the last of a race or a society imparting knowledge onto like the community? Do you have anything on that? I know I posed my question terribly. Sorry.
No, that's actually very interesting. I hadn't really thought about it. I will say this, that when you look into when you look into the beliefs of people like the Theosophists, they will often talk about ancient races that are trying to pass lore onto them. For example, when you look at the beliefs that surround Mount Shasta, they talk about how Mount Shasta is full of the people of Lemuria, that was like the Pacific version of Atlantis. And when it sank, they went to the mountain of Lemuria, and that they have reached a level of spiritual awareness and psychical ability that when they meet, that they will sometimes pass this ability on to a few chosen people. So in that, I can't think many of any individuals, but I can think offhand of some examples of, again, ancient races that would try to pass on their special knowledge to a few chosen, especially wonderful human beings.
Well, on that tip, there's the whole story of Meher Baba. Baba O'Reilly by The Who. You know that guy, right?
Yes.
I just think it's so funny, like, they talk about, like, the Ascended Masters. There's only 5 on the world at any given time, and they're the ones who are supposed to recognize the avatar of, like, God incarnate and things like that. I just think all that stuff's just so interesting. Again, I'm going outside of the United States for this one and into a very obscure part of Southern Asia. Do you know about the brothers Jonathan and Luther Htoo, H-T-O-O?
No, I don't. Nothing. I've never heard that.
Yeah, me neither.
Really? They were two brothers at the age of 8 years old who supposedly fought a running guerrilla warfare campaign against the fascist government of Myanmar, what used to be called Burma.
Oh,
and,
yes, I do know about that. Yes, I didn't know their names, but I did know about their army. I had heard about that. It was a pretty, if I remember correctly, they didn't come out of it too well. Is that right?
If I'm not mistaken, they tried to hold up a hotel, I think, maybe in Malaysia. I might be getting my countries mixed up, but they were holed up in there with hostages, and the government stormed the building. And both of them, they weren't killed for whatever reason, even though they were vocal and military opponents of like a fascist regime. They weren't killed. I think Luther is in jail. I'm not sure about Jonathan, but they have the whole folkloric story about how these guys were impervious to bullets, and at the age of 8 they were leading like whole villages against like the Myanmar fascist government. And one villager like followed them into the forest where supposedly they transformed into old men in the middle of a river stream, bathed, and then transformed back into 8-year-old boys. How they would transform into tigers and all these things, like just so interesting. And this was
that really is. It's interesting also because those stories that seem so ancient are still alive in many parts of the world. I sometimes think we in the West make the mistake of thinking the entire world is in 2014. It's not. They're on their own timelines, and ideas and beliefs that we would consider ancient are alive and well throughout the world. And they're alive and well here, too. We just don't notice them that much because we have different names for them.
Yeah, and there's also that, but there's, in my opinion, along with like Jeanne d'Arc, like Joan of Arc, you have the tradition of like the young child leading the old into battle, and inspiring people. Mm-hmm. It's just weird. Like sometimes I feel like these people kind of, I don't know how I feel religiously about it, but like it pops up in different societies. You always have like, there's this galvanizing force, and it's always someone that's really young and someone that's very like new to the scene. Mm-hmm. Do you have any information about Kaspar Hauser in Germany at all? I don't know if you've seen the Werner Herzog movie, the Enigma.
I haven't seen it. I did read a book on him, but again, I probably can't add much more than what you would know, or what anyone who's read a book or two about Kaspar Hauser. I do often wonder where he was kept until he showed up. He said he was kept in a low room, and he had a toy horse, and that was about it. I wonder if the story is true, or whether he was just some poor child that was kept away for some reason and finally let out. It's one of those stories that seems, I'm sure it'll never be solved, but it just inspires so much speculation.
The thing that's interesting, though, is like the royal family, who he claimed to be descended from, like refuses all DNA test requests.
Well, I think
that's really interesting.
They still have his jacket, which still has his blood on it, if I remember correctly, from when he was stabbed to death. So his blood, his DNA is readily available.
Yeah, and like I think the woman that he claimed was his mother, her grave has been like excavated and the bones and all that completely removed to prevent DNA testing. This is a weird thing about Kaspar Hauser. Have you ever heard any of the reproduced compositions he made musically at all?
No, that I never heard of.
Oh, it's really interesting. He left like a bunch of scraps of like musical pieces, and very distant. Oops, I'm getting a little bit of fever.
Yeah, Mark, we pulled in another caller, Mark. Do you have your audio on in the background, Mark?
Yeah, let me see if I can get that down. Sorry.
Let's see if you can do that, man. Go ahead, Josh.
My computer messed up. I couldn't get it through the headphones.
Sorry. Just to finish my thought, sir, you should really look up the music of Kaspar Hauser. It almost anticipates like modern classical music. There's like Carl Stockhausen and things like that. There's a lot of weird dissonances. So even if this guy was like a complete fraud who was serially injuring himself to gain back the graces and notoriety of like the European public, he still had very, very like almost revolutionary ideas about music. Like it's very dissonant, almost hard to listen to, but it's extremely interesting to know like a dude like Kaspar Hauser actually wrote down the annotations.
Well, you see, from my perspective, just the idea that Kaspar Hauser wrote music, I have to hear it. It's as simple as that. If there's music by Kaspar Hauser, I want to hear that music.
It's on YouTube, man.
I will listen to it.
You can listen to it tonight. Hey,
yes,
it might give you a headache, though.
So, Mark, you got a question too? Mark? Mark? You got a question, Mark?
On mute?
Yeah, Mark, you're probably on mute.
Going once, going twice.
There you go. Read your question, Mark. No? I'm going to read Mark's question for him. All right. He says, does your guest have anything to say about James Shelby Downard and his claim stories? I just started researching him, and I don't know what to think.
I really don't know enough about him. He is a kind of a mind bender.
Okay.
And again, my own response to someone like him would be, my main interest would be himself and his history. Again, this has always been a bit of a problem with me because I write history, so I don't engage so much with, for example, paranormal phenomena or the ideas that the people I write about, as much as, again, from an historical perspective and what they mean to the larger history, what they reveal about American history and culture.
What about time travelers? A lot of people throughout history said they were time travelers and stuff like that. What do you think of that?
I don't know that. I don't know that there's a real tradition of belief in time travelers. Most of the time, I would say that historically, time traveling doesn't occur in the sense, in our sci-fi sense. Usually it's something like people will go into the world of the fairies where time travels at a very different pace. So that if you visit the world of the fairies, you think you've been gone one night and you've been gone for 100 years. Also, stories like Rip Van Winkle, which is based on traditions, it's more of a time bending or a time dilation than time travel. I know that time traveling has been a popular subject lately, and if I remember correctly, a few years back, someone was claiming to be a time traveler, but I haven't really looked into it very much.
Okay.
Yeah, what was the running show on Coast AM about that one guy? What was his name? Do you guys know?
He had an unusual name. I can't think of it offhand.
Tyler, something like that. Tydor.
Yes, I think that's what it was. Tydor, something.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, Ann, you had a question?
Yeah, it was something I saw on your page. It was about stigmata.
Ah.
I have a chapter on that in Mrs. Wakeman.
Phenomenon.
I'm sorry.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You had something about, you had a guy that was famous for riding roller coasters.
You're broken up. I can't hear you.
Oh.
Well, the first question was about stigmata. Then there was another question about a guy who was famous for riding roller coasters.
Yes, that was Father James Bruce. Father James Bruce, he when he was a young man, he held the Guinness Book of World Records for being on the a roller coaster longer than anyone else. But as he got older, he became a priest, and he developed the stigmata sometime in the 1980s, I think, for about 5 years, he not only had stigmata, he didn't have bleeding, if I remember correctly, but he had the marks of stigmata on his wrist rather than on the palm, which is where people usually got it. And even more striking than the stigmata was the fact that pictures and statues around him were supposed to start weeping. And this was recorded supposedly hundreds of times. I actually wanted to do the story I did about stigmata in the book was on a little girl named Claretta Robertson who had the stigmata, and she was just so unusual in that she was a child, which is rare for stigmatics. But she was a child. She was black, and she wasn't even Catholic, which are that's the usual qualifications to be stigmatic, is to at least be Catholic. But she was Protestant. She belonged to a local church, a fairly mainstream church, but she did suffer from the stigmata around Easter usually. Although she did have outbreaks of it at another time. I wanted to write about Father James Bruce initially because I thought the idea that he had held the world's record for roller coaster riding was just such an odd little thing to throw in there. And also he seemed like, for everything I've read about him, he seems like a very nice man, but he has been forbidden to discuss anything related to the stigmata or to the weeping statues. So he will not talk about it. And if you go to his page, he's got it's not a website, but his church has a page because he's still an active priest. He's got a picture of him with his cat, and he talks about his cat and his roller coasters and things like that. But there's no mention of the stigmata or of the weeping statues. They have been wiped from his record.
Have you looked into the Our Lady of the Roses over there at the World's Fair and the Yonkers or whatever?
Yeah. One night I went to they were having, their group had sort of an outreach around here, and I said, well, I have to go to see this. And I found it rather strange. It didn't sound like normal Catholicism to me. It sounded slightly cultish. I thought that there was something about it that I found disturbing. I just found that they were placing a little too much emphasis on what she said and what she thought, and that doesn't strike me as the traditional Roman Catholic approach to things, where it's really a question of is the teaching consistent with Roman Catholic doctrine? I mean, they were saying some things that struck me as very odd.
Yeah,
about demons and things like that, and possession and Satanists, and it just, I don't think that the Roman Catholic Church has given her their approval, and I would guess not, but I don't know enough about it.
No, they don't have the approval, definitely not, of the Roman Catholic Church. But they were a target of that same cult, the Process Church that was involved with Son of Sam.
Well, I can believe that. I mean, I can understand where a group, where the Process Church would not be comfortable with people that are claiming to see the Virgin Mary. But again, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm just going to keep stepping back from stuff I don't know that much about. Although I will say one thing: I did finally remember the name of that psychic who set up Project Stargate, which of course is Ingo Swann. I don't know how that name escaped me. How many Ingo Swans are there in the world?
Well, have you looked into all the connections with the Church of Scientology, all the remote viewers and stuff?
Yeah, well, I've heard about that. Again, I don't know much about it, but again, there are people that do make these connections. I have, again, if you want to ask me about the history of it, I'm always going to be more comfortable. When you start talking about large theories and what's connected to what, I step back.
All right, just asking if you heard of it.
No, I've heard of it.
I'm not asking to testify, my friend.
Right. I know. And I know it must be kind of frustrating, but
no, not at all. No, this is great stuff, man.
Well, I really do try to talk about things that I have a little more expertise about, because, heck, I can talk about anything. If you just want to hear me gas on about stuff, we can talk about politics, religion, art, music. I'll talk about it, but I don't know much about it.
Well, we're getting down to like the last 7 minutes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, what would you like to share? Anything special?
No, nothing particularly special. It's just that, I will say one thing that I hope listeners take, if they want to take something away from this, I hope they will begin to consider that there are aspects of history that have been forgotten, and for one reason or another, usually for very good reasons, they're oddities. Somebody might have been embarrassed about them, and yet there are these really, really fascinating things out there that I spend a lot of my life trying to dig up and trying to bring back to life, trying to get them out of the attic and up from the cellar so that people can read about them and begin to appreciate a whole new aspect of what American history and culture really is. American history is much more complicated, much more fascinating than most people would believe.
It's so true. It really is so true. There's just so many fascinating stories out there and interesting, obscure little pieces of information, that no one knows. Like even the thing about the bones underneath Ben Franklin's house. Like how many people even know that? But once you hear it, you can't unhear that.
You can't stop thinking about it. It's just too intriguing, and it raises possibilities. There was a guy who took my President's Vampire idea, and he based a novel on it, which he also called The President's Vampire. And around that time, that's when that whole Abe Lincoln vampire hunter thing got started, and I don't know what happened. But this thing about trying to find paranormal, trying to put American presidents into the paranormal became popular. In fact, I have another unfinished story I mentioned in my book was the discovery that Teddy Roosevelt considered going monster hunting.
That doesn't surprise me at all, considering how big of a, I hate to say it and lay this on the line about Teddy Roosevelt, but man, that guy loved to kill stuff, man.
Well, he was on Oak Island. He was part of Oak Island.
Well, there were reports of a plesiosaur-like creature, at least what they called a plesiosaur-like creature, being seen down in Patagonia. And they came from some very reputable sources, and Roosevelt was impressed. And he said that he seriously considered going down to Patagonia to go monster hunting to see if he could find this creature that was being reported. I'm going to post something about that in a day or two. The story, he never actually did it, but because he said if he didn't find anything, he thought it would be too embarrassing. So he never wanted it to be publicly announced. And so instead he went looking for the source of a river, caught a disease, and that's what killed him.
Oh.
Yeah. Should have gone monster hunting.
I can't let the show end without mentioning those sharks in that freshwater lake in South America and Champ up in Lake Champlain. Do you have any thoughts on those before the show ends, sir?
Well, can I change the subject to something related?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I'm sorry, but this was something I found not too long ago that I'm just fascinated by, and that was the discovery of octopuses in a river in Georgia. Yeah, again, go to the Historian of the Strange page. I've got a link to I've got the article there chopped up so you can read it, and I got a photograph of one of the octopuses that was found. And supposedly 5 big octopuses were found living in a freshwater river in Georgia. And it's one of those stories that, okay, here it is in the newspaper. Well, what happened? How did octopuses end up in Georgia? And so, like I said, that is one that I haven't been able to stop thinking about.
So good, man. It's good to have a 40 on the Edge show. Usually we're so obsessed with the blood and guts and the crime aspect. It's good to have like this real interesting, almost like not a flight of fancy, but it's like the real strangeness of reality. And anyone who's ever done any studying knows how strange reality really is. So it's good to have these like conversations, man. Thank you for getting on the show, and thank you, Ed, for having it.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much, man. This was a great show. Great information, and I definitely will have you back in the future, especially if you have a new book or something you want to promote. Definitely just give us a call. We'll definitely have you back.
Great.
Okay, guys, I want to thank my guest. Forget my guest's name. So late. I'm up since 4:00 in the morning, guys. I want to thank Robert Schneck, man, and for coming on the show. He has this great Facebook page called Historian of the Strange, and he's written some great books. You can find links to his books on my blog, The Opperman Report, The President's Vampire, Are You Psychic, and Mrs. Wakeman versus the Antichrist. So next week we got coming up a lot of great stuff. We got Legal Am coming up with the Curse of Oak Island. We got Catherine McDonald. I'm doing a show coming up about these Cuban I guess intelligence officers that came from Cuba here to investigate the terrorism that was going on down in Cuba, and they were arrested here. They got 16 years in prison. All kinds of stuff like that. Great stuff coming up. Man, a whole bunch of true crime guests coming up too. But that's it for tonight. I want to thank my guests. I want to thank Josh Brookshire from BookHouseBandcamp.com. And he's got a show, right? That's right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, got a show coming up in some a record store there in Washington, D.C.?
CD Cellar in Arlington, Virginia, right outside of the nation's capital tomorrow at 8 p.m. Be there.
Very good. Hey, you got a phone number if people want to get tickets somewhere they can call you?
Nah, first come, first serve.
Okay.
We're not the Foo Fighters, man.
Okay. Well, get there online. You can go sit online there tonight. You get a good seat to catch Josh. I want to thank everybody tonight. Thank CJ Mars and thank Hazy Radio. And don't forget, you can find us here on the Opperman Report YouTube channel and Spreaker.com. And if you want to make a donation, you can always go to OppermanReport@gmail.com. Keep the show going. If you want to advertise, hit me up at OppermanReport@gmail.com. And this definitely helps keep us getting these good guests on here. And we're going to have a show next week. It's what we need, okay? All right, guys. Good night, everybody.
Night, guys. Good show.
Good night. Thank you, Mr. Schneck.
Oh, my pleasure.
Good night.
You are listening to WCJV Digital Broadcasting, Youngstown, New York.